Hey, so I had to jump out of the shower when I started getting this flood of download of just something to share and talk about. And I just realized also it's an extension of stranger danger in a way. But as I'm speaking, it might feel like I'm trying to push this out, and it's because I feel like it's already gone. So hopefully it'll just come back as I start to express. But the thoughts I was having were the download was pertaining to this understanding that I have about some people who are in a state of victim consciousness are not aware of that. And so when you're not aware of it, you don't know that you can change it. And I believe a big part of that is because one of the first steps, which you'll always hear me say and repeat, is that we need to acknowledge and then we need to validate. And so what you see, what I can see a lot of times is people who are in a state of having acknowledged something that is painful to them within themselves or an uncomfortable experience they've had. And then they start telling their story for validation, meaning they are sharing to try to elicit empathy or sympathy or anything that makes them feel validated. Now, I want to point out that the state of consciousness that they're acting from is a very childlike state of consciousness. When we look outside of ourselves for validation, we can trace that back and clearly see that that is a developmental stage within all infants. When they start to become toddlers, babies are in a stage of looking to the parent to see if what they're doing is safe. And this is an important stage, but you can see that adults who are having experiences, perhaps traumatic experiences, are often retelling the story. Even someone who is retelling everything that happens in their day, right? Like I've seen this, where someone just wants to tell the same thing that happened to them to every person they encounter in their day. Well, this happened to me, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this is how I felt, and this is how I acted. And then I've noticed this because I could see that certain people would tell their story, and then a new person enters the mix, and now they're telling the same exact story again. And I always thought of it okay, well, they're stuck in a loop. And the more times they tell the story, the more times their brain has an opportunity to notice they're stuck in a loop. Right? But I feel like by talking about this, maybe I can bring it to awareness for anyone who is ready to hear it or understand it. This isn't exactly the download I was getting, but I'm hoping that it'll come back as I talk about this topic. So through the reliving of and the retelling of these stories, anytime that we are talking about a trauma that we've had, we know that we are still in victim consciousness, right? Because if we're fully healed and we've zero-pointed the energy, then we can also see the benefit of having had that happen to us. I know that sounds weird for someone who is traumatized, in a traumatized state, for me to jump to the point where I'm talking about a benefit of having that happened. But when you are fully healed, that's you balance out the energy in such a way where you're no longer over here in this low end of feeling disempowered. You've also experienced what it is to be empowered by that, and then now you've balanced it out, so you don't have to live in either one of those extremes anymore. So while you're still telling the story of any old trauma, you know that you are still in a victim consciousness. And if your victim consciousness also requires you to get outside approval, that means you are constantly retelling the story of your victimization. Now, this also affects other people, and maybe it spurs other people to notice, things within themselves, or, move away in a different direction, or be supportive of you, or whatever. So it's all working out perfectly orchestrated the way it's meant to. So I'm not saying that any of this is wrong. I'm just explaining from my point of view what's happening, so that if it's helpful for you to reflect on this process that's happening from this point of view, then you would find this video. Okay, so because it comes from a time in childhood where we were meant to look outside of ourselves, it feels like we need that to happen. And I have been in that state as well, where I was telling my story a lot. For instance, like the story of how I became separated from my children used to be something, it was obviously very traumatizing for me, but now I've worked through it to the degree where I can see different stages of where I was in processing it, right? And in the beginning stages, first it was denial, and I did that a lot with drinking and drugging and not talking about it. And then there came a point where I was talking about it, and I was talking about it a lot. And so that was me trying to seek validation, you know. Eventually, I got to a point where I understood what needed to happen, and I got validation for myself. I took it for myself. Okay, and thus began my journey of kind of maturing myself through that stage of needing outside approval, looking to mom for the cue that what I'm doing is correct and right, and then just like making myself the mom, asking myself for recognition, and doing that, switching in that simple little way is really what changed everything for me, because then I no longer had to wait around for somebody else to get it, for somebody else to understand, for somebody else to notice. It was like, as soon as I notice, then I know what I need to do. I need to validate myself. And I know it's all valid, so there's no part of me I'm arguing with on that. Like, I take it in faith that what I'm going through here is something orchestrated by the divine and by a plan. And that's easier for me to understand because I've done astrology, you know, because I can see that there is a map of energies, and I've seen them play out, and I've talked to so many people with respect to their chart that it's just, I cannot deny that there's something to it, right? So I know that the purpose of that chart could be debatable, but I know there is a chart, and that's enough for me to know that this is orchestrated by something other than, you know, just me, or other than this version of me, like a higher, bigger knowing version is in on this. So I know that I can trust and have faith that things are happening for me. Now, at first I couldn't, of course, and I had to earn back my own trust. So when I noticed that I had an issue with trust in life, that was something that I earned back over time, of rescuing parts of myself that still felt like she was a victim. Gosh, that download still is not coming back. So I think I'm going to pause this here, and I'll come back if it does return to me as something important to share, and if I can get a hold of that part of me that understood how it tied into stranger danger. Stranger danger is another way that we play victim in our society, like it was taught to us, and it felt comfortable because if we are victims, there's a lot of ways that victim is like felt as a safe place to be, because often the victim doesn't get kicked while they're already down. There's not a lot of high expectation for the victim. The victim gets care, you know? And these are things that are very appealing to a child, to someone who is stuck in a developmental stage where that is required and needed for them to feel good in life, you know? Like, when we get invalidated by our parents, we can say that that would be a moment where we feel victimized. And some people might not even be willing to admit that, right? But if there's a part of them that buys into any victimization anywhere else, it could be correlated. All right. I've lost the download now. Hold on. oh, this one was so good. Like I was in the shower, and it was all like coming in, and I was like, yeah, 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 I get that, I get that. Oh, I gotta document this. I gotta document this. I wanna like share this, and it just so so it's integrated in me so fast. What is it then? It's that I can see people who are in victimization, and I can see that they're not willing to see themselves that way. And I can see that they instead want to justify the reasons why they should feel victimized. And that I think is because they're in that stage of seeking outside of self, because it's a developmental stage of childhood where you seek outside yourself to your parents' approval. And now, as adults, this carried through because it was not there was some sort of incomplete maturation. Like the maturation of that stage was not complete in the development of that child, which is pretty common, I would say. And often the parental measures that create this for children are passed off as normal. Like things like saying kids are meant to be seen, not heard. Things like saying, I'll give you something to cry about. Things like saying, I didn't yell at you. I was just telling you, firmly. Or, just like gaslighting our kids, not validating our kids, not seeing our kids, not helping our kids know that it matters, and expecting our kids to do something that we say instead of realizing that kids do what we do, not what we say. So if we tell our kids to dismiss their feelings because their feeling doesn't matter on this whatever topic it is, which has elicited an overflowing feeling from them, they're not going to dismiss their feelings because we said. That's not how the victimization program gets put in them. The victimization program gets put in them because we dismissed their feelings in that moment. We acted like it did not matter. Not only did we say it didn't matter, we also acted like it didn't matter to us. And that is why they will also dismiss it in themselves, and it will show up later as one of these unprocessed, unconscious, victimized states of operating in the programming, which will make it difficult for them to notice where they could actually empower themselves to work through any places where they're having difficulty. It becomes like it's a part of the operating system that is causing a lot of detriment and holding people back and causing depression and anxiety and things like that. Suicidal ideation, I would even say, because the child has been taught through the example of the parent who it was also done to them, and we need to break the cycle of teaching our kids that it doesn't matter about processing emotion, that they should suck it up. And it's not actually true, because the only thing you could possibly do by dismissing a child's emotions is you could lodge them in them so that they cannot process that feeling, and that they have to carry it with them in their energetic body to keep experiencing until they are developmentally aware of the fact that it's a pattern and the fact that they can take responsibility for it themselves, which can take quite a long time when they don't have any examples of anyone doing that. And some people will even reject the example of the person doing that, because that's what sometimes kids do. They take little fits, right? So I just wanted to bring it to awareness, bring it up and out in these kind of terms, which says, first of all, it's not wrong. Second of all, I notice it because I've lived through it myself. That was something that I had an issue with and I had to work through. And also, from my perspective now, it's difficult. It's frustrating to see a loved one in a pattern that I know is a pattern, that is a disempowered pattern that they could take responsibility for, but they literally would never see that as an option, and they would never ask me for any advice because they know I would tell them to take responsibility for it, and their program is still telling them that they need outside approval. So that's who they're looking for, the person who can validate their wound. So I have made efforts to validate wounding, as my first step in any conversation I'm having with somebody who's expressing wounding to me. Instead of trying to solve it now, I acknowledge and validate it. Okay, because those are the first two steps of what needs to happen. Now, I have noticed that even though I do this, it doesn't solve it. I thought it would. When I changed my operating system to this, I thought that'll solve it because then they'll be able to move through and accept it for themselves. It doesn't always solve it because... Why? Why doesn't it solve it when they need validation, they're stuck in a developmental stage that needs seeking outside validation. I give them outside validation and they still go and look for more outside validation. Because they're stuck in victim consciousness. Yes, so it's a habit. It's simply just a habit. And it has to be chosen consciously. Yes, we need our free will to choose something different for ourselves. So when I accept and be present with something in myself that I've acknowledged and validated, I'm using my conscious free will to do so. And I wouldn't do that unless I was acknowledging and aware of that was being a possibility. So I think maybe by sharing this, I'm sharing that it is a possibility for us to break our own habits, but there are certain steps that'll help us loosen up the energetic kind of like knots that are holding these things in place. And maybe I've touched on some of the reasons why some of those things could be lodged in us to just kind of help towards the validation and the understanding and the awareness that will get us on the way to being free from living in a victimized state. And we've touched on some of the reasons why it can feel safe and right to be in a victimized state. And I would just like to share and reassure people that it also feels really free and light and happy and wonderful to not be in a victimized state, to feel the sense of trust in self for handling and taking responsibility for what arises, for processing through my own emotions. It feels wonderful. I'm fully equipped, like I'm a walking, toolbox of whatever I happen to need when it comes to my own processing of experiences in my life. And I'm not needy on other people. I'm not putting burdens on other people emotionally. I'm not wasting time being a broken record trying to get validation outside of myself. I'm much more free. I am. I don't have anxiety. I don't have depression. When I have any like discomfort in a moment come up that like reminds me of a pattern, then I know what to do with it. Like I don't need to tell my story. I don't need to share. Sometimes some of these things, it does help to be witnessed. So if you have someone who's also of the awareness and doing this kind of work, it can help to kind of talk about and see yourself through being witnessed. But if you don't have that, it doesn't mean you can't do it, because I did most of my stuff for 10 years. I did it without anyone to bounce off of. And I just recently got somebody where I talk to somebody on a regular basis. And that's nice too, but it's only like twice a month. So there's plenty of times where I handle it on my own still. It's just nice to know that another person exists who's willing to take it to this level and to clear out their own stuff, and to take full responsibility, and who understands how this is all working and the laws of the universe and the benefits of becoming free of these programs that are really limiting us and making us ill in the long run, because those energies that get lodged in us, eventually they cause illness, and they get louder and louder, and they can really weigh us down. And it takes, our conscious free will to move that energy out once it gets lodged there, because we need to do all these steps to kind of untangle the energy. So anyway, yeah, maybe that's the purpose of this sharing. It's kind of separate from stranger danger healing, but also could be considered a continuation of the reflection on being a victim, which is a whole nother part of stranger danger, and why we might have felt comfortable in having that in our society, because we felt victimized in many ways, and it felt comfortable to be in that way of operating. So as we understand ourselves and spend time with ourselves, we no longer like feel traumatized, and we can kind of like see like like I've been through a lot of things that in my lifetime I would have called trauma, right? But like now I don't feel traumatized. I'm not carrying stuff with me. People wouldn't even know what I've been through. And that's fine with me. I don't need them to know, because there's no part of me that needs their validation anymore. I've validated myself on those things. But I'm not carrying like remnants of the tragedies and the traumas that I went through. I have healed and I have understood, and therefore I don't need to carry the burden of that energy. That won't make me sick, that won't make me feel bad, that won't make me depressed, I just feel like it's well worth it, and I would love for people to be aware if that is something that will be helpful for them to be aware of. Yeah. Okay. So apparently that is why I jumped out of the shower.